if you split down your marketing investment into a pie chart and you're seeing something that is absolutely huge swallowing the majority of that pie, that is time to be thinking about what other channels you need to invest in to make sure you've got something else going on in the background, to make sure that you're not suddenly going to have a massive drop off in your ROI, in your lead pipeline, in your e-commerce sales, whatever it is that you're focused on.
Hello and welcome to the Dojo Research Marketing Podcast. This week we're going to be talking about how to create a scalable enterprise marketing strategy, and I'm joined by Exposure Ninja's CEO, Charlie Marchant. Charlie, what are the biggest marketing challenges for enterprise level businesses today?
This is a great question to kick us off with, because I think enterprise marketing is so large and so complex, and it has so many different stakeholders and players within it, that there's a significant number of challenges. And when people think of enterprise marketing, I think they sometimes just think like, oh, that means larger scale, like more campaigns going on. But actually, enterprise marketing has to be one very coordinated marketing strategy to be effective. And there's a lot of pain points within attempting to create that coordinated strategy. I'd say the top ones for enterprise businesses tend to be that they are separated into either certain divisions or certain departments. And that in itself makes the marketing quite fragmented, where you've got different people leading different areas of the marketing, or different marketing for specific divisions within the business. And those people may have their own goals, their own KPIs that are slightly different, therefore, to what other areas of the business are focusing on within their own marketing. So silos, in that sense, silos between internal teams can be quite common. You can also often see silos between the product teams, the sales, the marketing, and then usually someone like legal is also disrupting that. Potentially that could be also the corporate communications people in some of the much larger enterprises as well, because they have their own goals in the business. Of course, every business wants to be legally compliant. Of course, the corporate communications team don't want to accidentally put their foot in it somewhere. And so sales, marketing, product all have to work in harmony with those teams as well. So just having so many teams involved can very easily cause sticking points.
I can't help but wonder, if I'm leading one of those individual silos or teams or divisions, that it might be hard to stay aligned with what the greater kind of marketing strategy led by perhaps a marketing director, a CMO, VP is. How do I make sure that I stay aligned to what the company is driving towards, whilst also, I imagine, having a lot of ideas myself of things I want to play around with?
Yeah, which is so important as well. I would say there's going to be three key things to do. The first is going to be the vision of that VP or CMO, or whichever the title of the role is, that is the overseer of the general arc of the marketing, and communicating that effectively with the team, because that in itself is not, as any CMO or VP of marketing will know, that in itself is not a one-way conversation. That has to be two-way feedback between the teams you're working with, and what they're seeing from the customers or the clients, what they're seeing close to the ground, also has to feed back into that vision, that direction where the business is deciding to go, where the CMO has the fantastic insight into what the board, what the senior leadership team, what the CEO actually want to be achieving, where they're positioning in the marketing, what they want to do. So firstly, communicating that vision effectively and having everyone on board with it. Secondly, I think it has to be very clear goals that the business considers the top level marketing goals. And there's going to be a endless waterfall of goals and KPIs underneath those. But at the top level, there should be very clear final marketing goals that are actually going to be either directly related to the business's revenue, or directly related to a lead generation if they're selling a service or a software type of thing. I think having that is extremely important. And then what you want under that is people who have KPIs and goals that directly contribute to making sure you get towards that final number that you're going for. And then thirdly, I think it's to do with actually having just something simple like a one pager so that everyone has somewhere they can go to if they have a question that commonly gets asked, something where they can filter their thoughts through it as to whether something is worth doing or not worth doing within the marketing strategy. And that might sound really simple because I'm sure loads of enterprise businesses are thinking like, wow, one pager, I've probably got hundreds of pages. The point of having it on a one page is because it's quick and easy to read. And what you actually want is someone to be able to quickly sense check themselves within it so that the ideas they do bring feel like they fit in with the agenda of that one pager. 100-pager, no one's reading it.
Absolutely not. Well, you could feed it to an AI and get it to summarize it for you, I suppose.
Yeah, though most enterprise businesses, of course, don't want any of their marketing data in AI as well. So it's quite likely it just wouldn't get read.
Absolutely. But it seems to me that it was before you really getting to creating strategy and scaling up, there's a lot of the pre-work that needs to be done with the laying the groundwork of who we are, what we're trying to communicate, brand guidelines, tone of voice guidelines. Like, it sounds like a lot of work in itself.
I think there is, and it's also not surprising for an enterprise marketing function to also have a brand team within it. And sometimes that brand team also causes a separate silo when we're thinking about conflict points as well, because their role, of course, is to make sure everything feels on brand, which isn't necessarily what SEOs or content writers who are trying to target certain keywords, improve certain organic traffic scores, that kind of thing's probably not what they want to hear. But also social media and influencer team who are trying to jump on trends and they're trying to do it quickly. Same for PR teams. Also probably don't want to hear that they've got to go via the brand team. And that potentially takes time. That potentially comes with red tape. So actually the relationships between those people are incredibly important as well. And actually having a foundational process where sign off can be done quickly for things that need to be quick, and where sign off has all of the right checkpoints that it needs, particularly for larger scale projects, larger scale investments in marketing, to make sure that budget isn't wasted or is definitely allocated to the business's real priorities for those top line marketing goals we spoke about earlier, I think is incredibly important. So there's always the process, there's always the relationship, and there's of course the actual focus, like the strategic plan that's going on behind it.
One of my favorite kind of tools I saw when working with a law firm that had like multiple, it was like a national law firm, was they have like a tier list of like levels of approval. Okay, like if you want to do this piece of content, it only has to be seen by this one layer. This second piece, tier 2, okay, needs to go through 2 or 3 stakeholders. This third tier, the top tier, right? You need to consult this team and that team, whatever, and just kind of make sure that's available for every team in their individual silos. Although we don't want to be so too siloed, of course, unless they're operating different brands.
Love it.
It's just great for people just to be like, right, very reactive, very useful, as you mentioned before, for social, where you don't have the time to send something up the food chain and have to wait a week or 2 weeks for something to be approved before you can actually execute on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other bit that we've kind of not touched on here is the MarTech stack, the marketing tech stack that these businesses have as well. Because when we're talking about shared goals, it's all great to think we've got a shared goal, but actually you need the shared data of how you're progressing towards that goal. And I think that's a huge challenge, is having a tech stack that is actually designed for integration and scalability. And I think a lot of enterprise marketing teams can struggle with making sure they've got the right tech in place, but particularly when there's legacy tech. When you come into a role, a team's already using a certain kind of tech, even if you feel it's not really going to scale with the business, it tends to be worth getting it switched out earlier, because the longer you have something, the more legacy it becomes, the more stuck to it you become. But actually there tends to then be eventually a pain point or a tipping point where it just doesn't deliver for the business. So deciding when to make the investment of switching over things like your CRM, if you've got marketing automation platforms, particularly for emails, that tends to be very common. Your analytics platforms as well, because while some enterprise marketing teams will use analytics, Google Analytics, some will also want Adobe Analytics. Some might find that they've got completely different setups when they come into the role, and making sure that everyone understands how to get the data out of those systems, even if they're just view only participants in those systems, actually where to go, what they're looking at, how they know that they're progressing forward.
Yeah, I would say, like, looking at some of the most successful enterprise campaigns and some of the campaigns that we worked on, the utilization of data seems to be key. Like, if you want to do fantastic segmentation work, for example, where we've helped some teams to build out their CRM platforms and get the very most out of all the contacts, the lead generation that they're doing. It's bringing everything together. Okay, this is what the our Google Analytics data is telling us, which then feeds into a change in SEO strategy, which, if when we pair that with the comments on social, we pull that data from there, also impacts the keyword strategy as well. We tie that into the CRM. We can do a new form of lead generation, which works exactly for that segmentation. And we can build out the content in that nurturing process, in the re-engagement email, especially with e-commerce, very useful too. Like, bringing all of that together and getting some synergy as well doesn't necessarily have to be within one person's role, but it certainly needs to be like a shared responsibility for everyone to just get the very most out of all of that data that you probably have lying around, even if it does, as you say, require a difficult, tough decision up front to switch things around and get the right processes and software and things in place, is worth it in the long run for what you're trying to achieve with the bigger company objective of 5%, 10%, 25% growth over the next year.
Yeah, and I think it takes a lot of direction from the CMOs, the VPs that manage the company's strategy overall, but also those divisional managers, because quite often what we see is there's not shared dashboards. Everyone's got their own dashboard for tracking their KPIs, the metrics that they feel are important, but actually making sure that lines up so that if you're having to report upwards, those metrics are the metrics that that person is interested in, that that stakeholder wants to see, that also impact their role as well. But also, if you're managing down, then making sure that you have the tracking that you need to understand how well your team are doing in certain areas as well, what's actually progressing. And those are going to be things in enterprise businesses that look like potentially pipeline contribution, actual leads coming through. They're going to be things like a client lifetime value and estimates on what that looks like, particularly if you have repeat customers as part of the model rather than one-off deals, which many enterprise businesses do. And things like return on investment, how much something is actually worth, how much it costs to deliver, what the rough profit margin usually is on that kind of work. And that's generally staying away from vanity metrics when you're at the top level of reporting, but you would have those sort of progress markers within that to understand which parts of your marketing strategy are delivering, which divisions are actually delivering in their marketing as well.
The role of a marketing leader in an enterprise seems to be particularly complex, and it's about not only delivering against marketing objectives with a great marketing strategy and tactical execution, but it's also stakeholder management, it's relationships, it's knowing how to navigate some of the bureaucracy that will happen no matter what, no matter how smart or how well you execute so many different things within a marketing organization. Are there any other challenges that you think that need to be overcome for really great scalable enterprise marketing to be efficient and to work?
Well, I think that kind of is the definition of scalability in enterprise marketing. We really are talking about growth, but growth that also comes with some consistency and some efficiency, not just spending more marketing budget or not just increasing the headcount every time you need to do something, which of course when you're trying to get sign off just makes life more and more difficult if you want more spend, more headcount, even though some projects would of course come with that. So I think thinking about how everything comes together to be efficient and prioritizing is incredibly important. Just even a very simple prioritization of projects that are urgent, like they actually need doing because they're fundamental to the business, or certain teams cannot operate if those things are not done. They need doing. Then the important, like the priorities in the marketing strategy that you know are going to drive those top level metrics, the ROI, the pipeline contribution, whatever it is that you know you need to push forward for, that should fall under the important. And then I think there's probably so many ideas when it comes to enterprise marketing. So you've got so many great people in these marketing teams, all with different backgrounds, all with different experiences of things that have worked and projects that they'd love to start, which has to fall into the nice to have category. And then in that nice to have category, that is where you need that management of a senior stakeholder to decide, okay, what are we investing in here that we aren't 100% sure is going to impact these top line metrics, but hopefully it will do. What are we putting a bit of experimental budget into? Where are we trying to push ahead of competitors within our marketing strategy? I think those nice to haves have to go into almost like one bucket, and then someone has to bring that strategic, what are we doing in the market thought train to then sort those.
I suppose the next question for you from that becomes, where do we start with this? Where do we start with putting together an enterprise marketing strategy for 2026?
Absolutely. I think it starts with the strategic focus, what the marketing function is trying to achieve in that business. Then it has to be a clear operating model. And when I'm saying operating model, I'm thinking about the roles and the accountability. So clear roles and accountability, whether that's marketing on a per region basis or a per division basis. Everyone should be able to come into work and they know what goal they need to achieve, that they're working towards, at least on a yearly basis, even better if on a quarterly basis. Then the processes, and those processes often have to come from the management team. Otherwise, it can feel a bit like herding cats. You've got lots of great people who are really intelligent. They can be super good at their jobs as well. But if they're going in all sorts of different directions, it's really difficult to manage and actually be achieving the top level targets. And sometimes that's not down to having the right people. It can be that you've got the right people, but the wrong processes or a lack of process. And actually, even though there is often a sense of people pushing against having too much process or too much red tape, particularly at enterprise scale, there is also a side where people in teams want to have clear accountability and clear processes because they don't want to spend their work time in repeat conversations, meetings that feel like they go around in circles, not a clear sign-off process where they don't know if it's even worth proposing projects, or just feeling like their time is wasted or confused, that they're just a cog in a machine that doesn't actually deliver outputs. No one actually wants to feel like that. So there's a really good balance of having processes that allow people to get their jobs done well without over processing stuff and telling them exactly how they have to do everything in order to deliver on the goals and the remit of their job. That part they should be able to do and take accountability for themselves within a broader system that actually has processes that work. And then there's, of course, like a governance, a regulatory side in enterprise marketing of making sure that you do have the legal team happy with everything, making sure that you are taking care of all of the regulations, whether that's things under sustainability, whether that's things under GDPR if you're EU based, and actually making sure that everything you're doing has a sign-off process for, yeah, the business is all good. We've ticked that box. We're happy to go ahead with things. And that can often be very simple checks. That could just be one person who always does a check on any new project that's going through, for example.
I think that's one particular area that we do quite well in with our clients and the businesses that we support is that you need the agencies that you work with to also be on the same level with so many of these points where it comes to matching up or pairing up with understanding the objectives and strategic execution, like how they can deliver against it. Also understand like how the best processes work to keep things cohesive and you know, everybody's reaching that same goal, but also that can support with making sure you're matching with regulation and compliance and things like that. Like the sectors that we tend to work with, professional industry, sometimes some regulated sectors like finance and a few others, you need to be able to trust the partners that you work with too, to be able to kind of keep that streamlined process, make sure that things go through correct without the necessity for things to be double and triple checked, which as I say, I think is something that we do quite well.
And I think strong working relationships with agencies are extremely important in enterprise strategies as well, because it's almost unheard of that there would be an enterprise marketing strategy that doesn't include specialist agencies, because it's impossible for an in-house team to have all of the specialist knowledge, I would say especially in emerging areas, things like AI search, because within an in-house team, unlike a marketing agency, you're not spending your research, innovation, development budget in those areas of marketing, because that's not what you sell. You're actually spending that on what the business does, what the product does for its customers. And so those specialist areas require agency input, whether that's through consultancy or whether it's actually through an implemented for you strategy or project for a specific area. And having agencies that understand how to speak with the stakeholders in the business, but also how to manage that relationship, I think is very underestimated, because having the right stakeholders on the calls in order to get work through the pipeline that happens on the client side, on the enterprise business side, is extremely important. Like if you've missed the brand team out, that only causes a kickback further down the line and it comes back. That piece of work then doesn't get out. If the piece of work doesn't get out and implemented, it's not actually having an impact on the marketing metrics. It's not having an impact on the progress of that business. So I think making sure that when an enterprise business is choosing an agency, they're confident that they're going to get someone who understands that there is going to be bureaucracy, there is going to be red tape, there is going to be different stakeholders to manage within that, and are confident doing that, and an agency that can manage those situations delicately, that isn't just going to get frustrated about the fact that they can't always get things implemented on their original timeline that they would like, but also isn't just going to sit back and say like, oh well, this is a their side problem, because actually the agency should be determined to get work that it believes is important over the line for that business, because ultimately the agency's job is to make sure those goals and KPIs are hit within that business as well. So I think that relationship is incredibly important to make sure that the work is smooth and efficient, because the last thing you want is them feeling like you're managing your marketing agencies, no matter what area of specialism is. You actually want to feel like you're collaborating, they're helping move you forward, they're helping educate the team on the specialist areas that they need. And if they've got a project to deliver, they're just going to get that out the door by managing the relationships that they need to manage with the stakeholders internally as well.
Yeah, the very last thing you want is to have a relationship with an agency where you kind of dread the next coming call. You're just like, I really can't be bothered with this. You want someone, or whether that's your point of contact or the agency, the campaign team, you'll look forward to working with them, looking forward to the next call, because you have so many questions. You know that they're going to have all the answers. Like you want to have like confidence that they're, as I think I was said before, like a partner and not just another agency, just a vendor. Because the other day, you need to have confidence to what you have proposed to your line manager, your key stakeholders, when you've potentially been the person who's picked this agency. You only get one shot at getting that right, because if you don't and it doesn't work out, it's going to be a lot harder to get executive buy-in on picking the next agency. You made a bad call on the first one. You may not necessarily get an easy time getting approval on the next one. Okay, everyone makes, some agencies under deliver, but you got to make sure that you're making the best bet and you're making the best decision and choosing the best agency, and that's one that's going to collab with you. And again, if you get it wrong, you're going to have a hard time getting approval next time around.
Yeah, I mean, and when we're thinking about how to check that, because I think it can be very difficult, there's a lot of agencies in specific areas, and once you've got a short list of specialist agencies, it can be quite difficult to decide who you're going with. My advice on that would be to actually look at the case studies, not necessarily thinking about like, are you expecting to see certain competitor names or something like that, but actually, are the results that they're driving and the challenges that they're solving for the clients they've worked with similar to the challenges that your business has? And I would take the brand names out of it completely and actually be looking at what the projects were that they had to deliver and whether that project overlaps with the kind of challenges that you're trying to solve within the business as well. But particularly because in certain areas of specialism, AI search is a great example. Lots of CMOs are now thinking about how they integrate that in their strategy for 2026. It isn't necessarily the case that your competitors will have done it yet, which is the whole point of innovation in an enterprise marketing strategy. So if you're constantly just looking for case studies of your exact competitors or certain people within your sector who have implemented something as a kind of safety net, you're going to really struggle with that long-term innovation side, because there are going to be things where actually you want to be the first mover. And actually, the best way to do that is to look for case studies of similar challenges, maybe in adjacent industries, maybe even on smaller scale projects, like proof of concept work that agency can deliver results that are similar to the results that you need to see. And then, of course, there's a relationship part as well. I think it should feel, when you speak to that agency on the phone, you should have some type of click. You should feel like it's a smooth conversation, that you're confident and comfortable that the people can deliver. And I would say don't overlook your gut feeling on that. I'm not really a person who recommends gut feeling all of the time, but generally, if this is the kind of thing you've worked on before, your gut is fairly well educated on having a good sense of whether you think someone is actually trustworthy and going to deliver the work you want. So I wouldn't overlook it.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of gut feel, for sure. I love the point about innovation, where there are so many different things changing. And again, as we mentioned earlier, one of the challenges is that there is so much change within every part of the marketing mix. Every channel has its changes. Social can change overnight with just one algorithm switch. Everything you knew that works before may just stop working entirely. So with that in mind, and the fact that there is innovation required, how do we go about creating an enterprise marketing strategy that does scale in 2026?
Yeah. And I think this is probably one of the biggest challenges that anyone creating that strategy has, is that when you're working at an enterprise marketing level, you're creating a significant omni-channel marketing strategy that needs to be very well integrated. It needs to have cohesive messaging across the markets you're serving. And you also need to be making sure that everyone in the team is on a similar page. I would say the 80-20 rule still applies in enterprise marketing. 80% marketing services, marketing areas, channels that you know are going to deliver well for you. If you've done something in 2025 and it's delivered well, keep pushing it in 2026. 20% thinking about what's going on in the market, what's changing, what innovations are next, where are your customers going to be moving to. That's incredibly important when we think about search, when we think about social, all of those types of things, because people's habits online do change over time. And I'm sure any business, for example, who was investing very heavily in Meta and then found that everyone went over to TikTok when that came out, that's an exact example of thinking about the future and not putting all of your eggs only into one basket. So if you feel like actually there isn't enough variation in there, if you split down your marketing investment into a pie chart and you're seeing something that is absolutely huge swallowing the majority of that pie, that is time to be thinking about what other channels you need to invest in to make sure you've got something else going on in the background, to make sure that you're not suddenly going to have a massive drop off in your ROI, in your lead pipeline, in your e-commerce sales, whatever it is that you're focused on, when it comes to potential changes in the market that will happen. And that means, for anyone who's in a VP CMO role, that means being very forward thinking. It means a lot of research, understanding what's going on in the market, following specialists in certain areas of marketing as well to hear what they have to say about it. And sometimes I think that does mean that people in those roles need to bring forward projects and take them up to their VP, take them up to their senior leadership or the board. And it's going to be a harder pitch because you're pitching something that you can't necessarily show a definite ROI on. And you have to be thinking, this is the long-term game. This is a long-term play that we're making. And we've also got our short-term plays already in place that are delivering and that we know are going to deliver, we're going to double down on next year as well.
If you are in a marketing leadership role and you do have some success behind you, and you know various marketing channels that you've added to the mix over years have worked well, you've got a good track record, but you come along with a new idea, how do you get that buy-in when you want to propose something that's just radically different? So for example, you mentioned about TikTok there, like the team over at Currys, which is a UK-based electronics retailer. They completely departed from what you would expect from their brand and tone of voice to just work with what the channel wants. But that takes, at their scale, their size, requires a little bit of gut feel from the person who's proposing it, but also a lot of a lot of trust from the people above it. How do you kind of navigate that and earn that trust on an idea that completely comes out of nowhere? As you mentioned also, with AI search, with these emerging AI platforms, this is all new, and there would be some trepidation from perhaps some of the top marketing leader roles that I don't know, I'm not confident. How do you navigate that?
Absolutely. So firstly, I think the important thing is not to doubt yourself. If you are in one of these roles in an enterprise business, it's because you're good at your job. It's because you're seasoned and experienced at doing marketing at this level and understanding how the market is likely to change. And when it comes to taking it to a CEO or a senior leadership or a board, most of those people do not have specific marketing backgrounds. They rely on your experience, your expertise, and your understanding of what you're putting forward in order to decide what's best for the business's marketing function. So firstly, don't doubt that. Secondly, I would say think about your reasons why and make sure those reasons why tie back to the goals of the CEO or tie back to the goals of the business. And those things will tend to be like revenue into the business, revenue from new markets, profitability of what's being sold or pushed, and thinking about why you think those things are going to be important. If you focus too heavily on metrics that feel like things like sentiment or visibility or even things like traffic or impressions, that can sometimes feel disconnected from those bigger objectives that the business is needing to think about. And if you do want to reference those because you think you've got something that shows some sort of evidence or progress in that direction, always be tying it back to those larger goals that you know are important to the person, to the stakeholders that you're speaking to. The other way I would also approach this is by thinking about breaking it down. It can feel like a really big thing if you're saying, okay, let's implement this huge project next year. We're going all in on TikTok. We're going all in on AI search or whatever it is. Actually, that can be very hard to get a 12-month contract for a piece of work across the line or a 12-month delivery team in place for that piece of work. Often you might want to think about how do you break a project down into phases, because that makes it more digestible for the stakeholders or the board that you're presenting to. Then you're also sort of chunking it down in terms of the cost. So whilst the cost to the business of the whole project may be a fairly significant investment of the marketing budget, and that can sound like a lot if you're verbalizing the numbers of something you plan to do across the whole of 2026. If you're just thinking about Q1 though, you're actually looking at just a portion of that budget. You're able to then set your own KPIs or metrics or outcomes that you want to see from that project. And that gives you a really great position to then pitch for phase 2 or even to pitch for the remainder of that project once you've seen the results of the first one. So I would say actually don't be afraid to break the project down. And if it's actually a specialist project, like some of the examples we've spoken about here, working with the agency to understand how it could be phased, because agencies are very used to breaking projects down when they need to into like neat areas so that we can see the outcomes before going into the second phase and make sure things are working. And a good agency would be thinking that way anyway, even if they're initially thinking about the larger project rather than just thinking about, how do we implement this whole thing, get it across the line. So breaking those outcomes down, I think, is incredibly important. On AI search specifically, David did just mention that we have heard from so many marketing managers in bigger companies that they're now thinking about how to manage AI search next year. We know that this is an area that a lot of the FTSE 250, the Fortune 500 companies, the big enterprise companies are already investing in. And we've also seen a huge amount of private investment going into AI search tools, particularly Silicon Valley, US tech, seeing a huge influx in this area as well. We actually have a webinar next week breaking down how Fortune 500 brands dominate in AI search results. And myself and Josh Bliscall, who is from the team over at Profound, which is a fantastic AI search tool, and he's one of their lead researchers, we'll be actually looking at Fortune 500 strategies of companies who have already started thinking about their AI search. In this kind of example, this kind of scenario, if that's something you're thinking about in your enterprise marketing strategy for next year, this is also a great way to show your board, to show your senior leadership team that other people are already investing. And the best play for you, I think, is if you don't have direct competitors who have thought of this yet, but you know that other big players are actually investing. It's almost like a safety net. You're almost able to show that there are people thinking ahead. You may not be the number one, but you can be the first mover within your sector and within your industry. I would say at that kind of level, don't be afraid to show what other businesses, what other enterprise marketing teams are thinking about and doing as well, because then you're not the only one, but you can still be that first one for your sector.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of our AI search audits, so we're actually starting to build up a bit of a queue for. It's hard to keep up with the amount of businesses that are interested in it, but if you are interested, do head over to our website, exposureninja.com, and you'll be able to find it there and join the wait list. What I particularly love about this, as you say, is if you do enough of the advanced auditing analysis, you can really show who's actually started to do some direct work and move themselves up the visibility tracker, as it were, in the same way that we have done for SEO. Like, we've been in SEO for 13 years at this point, doing search marketing, so we know it particularly well. Be able to show how a competitor's traditional Google rankings have increased over time is a great great fire to put into people that actually really need to get started on this now, because they've started to take off, and you're now playing a catch-up game rather than we're leading from the front game.
Yeah, absolutely. And you always want to be leading from the front as much as possible with enterprise marketing.
Absolutely. Now, when it comes to the strategy, are there any other points that you'd like to make sure we cover off for people who are going into strategy season, as it were, and planning for 2026? Are there any other parts that you want to make sure that we can assist them with before we close up for this week?
I think we've pretty much covered everything here. The objectives and the tracking, how you report on your dashboards, is something that you definitely want to have squeaky clean and shared across teams as well, even if you have different view levels. I think setting out the budget very clearly for your next year, splitting that into your short term, your long term, what you know is your bread and butter marketing work that's going to deliver, and what you know is your first mover advantage, the areas where you're innovating, where you're really pushing because you believe that they're going to be important to your customers, which means thinking omni-channel. It means thinking about personalization in all of those different channels that you're working on. And it does mean a little bit of putting yourself out there, and sometimes that does mean putting proposals for different ideas forward, which ultimately is what our senior leadership and boards want to see from us, because they want to see that innovation, that push forward. And I think also making sure that you're thinking more broadly about the stakeholders in the business when it comes to things like brand teams, things like technical teams, things like your legal and your corporate comms as well, if you have a parent company working within your organizational structure as well, because regulation compliance, they're almost like the foundational principles. You won't be able to do anything without them. So making sure you have those relationships built is incredibly important.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. But if you are looking for some additional support when it comes to planning out your enterprise strategy for this year, you can come and speak to us, exposureninja.com/contact or /review if you'd like us to take a look at your website and marketing, see how we can assist you there. But you can also stay and listen to more episodes of this series, the Marketing Strategies for 2026 series, where we're going to be helping you to create strategies for digital marketing, but also specifically for B2B enterprise, B2C. We're also going to be helping you create an AI search strategy too, content marketing strategy, digital PR strategy. It's all going to be covered in this series. So you can go to exposure.ninja/strategies 2026 and you'll get a full playlist of all those episodes as they come out on a weekly basis. Any final thoughts, Charlie, to share before we close?
Just that I'm so excited for this strategy series. Our 2025 one was so incredibly popular and supported so many businesses to actually put their strategy together and feel really confident in it. So I can't wait to get into them all.
Same, most exciting part of the year for me, for sure. Well, thanks everyone. We'll join us all next week for episode 3. Take care and see you then. Bye.